Hi, and welcome back to this edition of Transvox. And I'm joined today by Emma Cusdin. Is that the right way to say your surname,
That is
Emma?
Gillian. It's as with a Z. Yeah, brilliant.
Cusdin,
Lovely to
very
be
good.
here with you today. Yes.
And for the three people in the galaxy who don't know who you are, why don't you just tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everybody. My name's Emma Cusdin. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a director here at Global Butterflies. We're an LGBTQ plus consultancy for all workplaces, big ones, small ones, complex ones, global ones. We help organizations on their journey of LGBTQ plus inclusion without judgment, hopefully with some good humor. And we specialize in trans and non-binary inclusion. My own background is I've now been working in Global Butterflies for almost 4 years full time. Prior to that, I had over 30 years experience in senior HR roles in mainly financial services organizations, having worked across the world, typically as HR director, but also driving organizational change.
Yes, interesting. Where do you stand on the future of HR departments? I mean, I know it's a slight diversion.
Oh,
Let's just lurch in that direction first, shall we?
I think it's really interesting in terms of there's a lot in the press around that. We're seeing more impact from human resources than we've ever seen, especially
Mm,
through trusted partnering with leaders and organizations. I've worked with a whole range of different HR leaders. Some have been absolutely awesome, some maybe not so. But for me, this is about supporting the business and making sure people are at their best in an organization. And so I think there's a lot of noise, especially with sort of AI and how AI is going to change the workplace. But at the end of the day, we still have human beings in
mm.
our workplaces. And it's about how organizations create that culture environment for people to be at their very best. And I think, that's at the fundamental of the conversation. How HR do that, how they organize, what's the structure, how they do that, I think is an interesting conversation. But I think when it comes to organizations, ultimately, the vast, vast majority of our industries and sectors are made up of people. And
Mm.
so, this is about how people shine their best, do their best work.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I was on a podcast recently talking about the future of HR, and I very much come from the view that there won't be an HR department in about 10 years' time. And that's partly predicated on the recent research, which is talking about what's the role of HR, what's the future of HR, just should HR be on the management board. And for me, HR's never really seen itself as part of the leadership team. It's never really been, for example, some of the most heinous litigation exists within HR departments because of people management practices and such like. It's been fascinating. And I always go back to the fact that I did research in the 80s on research on HR, talking about the future of HR, whether it should be on the board, whether it has relevance, whether it's an impact. And it doesn't seem to have moved forward at all in 45 years. So I think it's
Yeah, I
been
might have a different
fascinating.
view to that. I might have a different view to that.
Yeah, good.
Um,
Well, the good thing is that what's interesting about both of us is that we've worked in the corporate sector for a long time before we come into the third sector. And I just wondered whether you saw, because HR is a lot about intellectual thought leadership, not necessarily welfare, but sort of, that sort of thing. But it has a part in that leadership debate, doesn't it? And I just wonder if you see a difference in that leadership debate between the corporate and the third sector worlds.
I think there is a very similar discussion to have in the third sector versus the corporate sector. I'd just add, just reflecting on what you said earlier, it's really interestingly where we work with so many different organizations and so many different HR teams within those organizations. And you can very easily have a view about which ones are more business
Mm,
partnering, which ones are more integrated into the organization, and which ones maybe are not. And I think for me, that's really interesting when we are working with those organizations. And the same true, you will know that through your work when you're partnering with external organizations. Sometimes it's really great and it's easy. Sometimes it's a bit hard and it's a bit clunky and it's a bit difficult. And, for me, that speaks volumes about that particular organization in terms of
Mm,
cultures, norms, leaderships, values, all those things I'm sure we'll talk about. So I think it's really interesting when we look at different sectors, and we especially look at the third sector. I think if we look at the third sector, especially in the LGBTQIA
mm,
plus space, typically, I think we haven't been good at thinking about us as a sector, having the confidence as a sector, haven't been good at working together in the sector. I think that is changing. I think that has been changing reasonably quickly, mainly due to some of the external stuffs that we're facing here in the United Kingdom right at the moment, and also in the US and other areas where it's more challenging, where the sector is coming together. But I still think we have come from a position where we've been very narrow in our thinking, some mistrust of working with others, some concern about how we share resources. I think it is changing. There's still more to do. We are a limited business in the third sector, so we're a little bit different as an organization, but we also have a charitable fund where we work with an external provider, the Amazing Give Out, and we're working with charities about granting that money to different organizations. And I think, that's really interesting when we dive into the sector around
yeah.
how we do share resources, how we share maybe even ideas or opportunities that we can
Mm.
maximize the impact of the sector.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I was just thinking as you were talking there about my own experience coming to this world. So I used to work in senior organizations running global leadership programs, massive change management programs. And then you become trans, and what people are then interested in is, would you like to talk to us about DEI or trans experience? And I'm saying, well, let me come and talk to you about your global leadership program. Oh, no, 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 we don't want that anymore. We want, and it's become, and I always sort of say the least interesting thing about me is the fact I'm trans. And I think it's often the case for people that it's almost as if, and some of it is to do with dead naming and understand that, but it's almost as if a lot of our expertise is sheared away because we're sort of pigeonholed into a place. We now have a sort of a role, haven't we? And it's interesting how many, contracts which I lost because I become trans, and you
Yeah.
wouldn't be taken seriously in our sort of engineering world anymore.
Yeah.
And I mean that's a natural fact of the world. There's no problem about that. But it is interesting about how this sort of space in which we can operate in terms of leadership is becoming more and more constricted, I think.
I think you've touched on a really important element, which is, in my corporate life, you were almost introduced as the HR director who's trans.
Yeah, yeah,
And yes, it gave opportunities. Yes, it opened some doors, but we can't walk away from the fact, I think, there is still what I call a pink ceiling for those people, or a trans ceiling would be a better word, for those
yeah.
people who do come out and live as authentically themselves. How many trans or non-binary CEOs do we have of FTSE 100, FTSE 250, FTSE 500, S&P Global 500 organizations? How many
Mm,
trans and non-binary board members do we see?
mm,
Where do we see that visibility? Yes, they are there, but they are few and far
yeah.
between. You know, yes, we know of a few trans and non-binary senior entrepreneurs. We know a couple of people who are running their own business, but ultimately, we don't see that visibility to the same part, I would say, to other elements of the community.
Yeah.
Um, so I still think there's a challenge of people being themselves, and the organizations will never overtly talk about that. They'll never
No.
recognize it. And some of that is around the label that you are given, and sometimes you take on board yourself within organizations,
Mm,
um, and how you lean into that and your own personal journey. But ultimately, I think it's about how organizations identify diverse talent and really lean into it. The UK job market is quite interesting at the moment in many sectors. Some
Mm.
sectors are crying out for amazing people and they've got more jobs than
Yeah.
people. Think about social care, think about the NHS, think about, those sorts of organizations. But equally, we know some organizations, there are more candidates than roles.
Yeah.
Um, and diverse candidates in those situations will always have more challenges, and we know finding roles for trans and non-binary people is really challenging.
Mhm.
um, so I think we need to be very aware of how we hold ourselves. We need to be challenging organizations when they're talking about diverse talent, that actually we are holding them to account.
And I think part of the just being elegant there and putting the power cable on. So I thought that that might help.
That might help.
I was doing that on my stalk impression there. The I've always worried that you see, and I have many fights about this with colleagues, that the failure of D&I is not a failure of theory, it's a failure of evaluation. Because actually, had this been seen as a workforce productivity tool, then actually it would have been something that leadership would have bought into. But it's not seen as that. It's sort of often seen as the preserve of the well-being HR department. It has developed something of a reputation in some organizations of box ticking or scolding, and I think we've lost that ability to say in a talent pool that's this, if you're expecting an X return on people,
Yeah,
it doesn't really matter what they are and what they present as. What matters is getting
yeah,
that return. But leadership don't treat people like that. They do, of course, but there's nothing monitored, and we've never put the systems in place to be able
yeah,
to prove our own worth. Really, this is the biggest problem.
yeah. I would agree. I think a lot of organizations have not ground their business case for
Mm.
diversity, equity, and inclusion in their own business.
Yeah,
And when it comes under pressure from outside factors, it crumbles.
yeah,
The good organizations are the ones that actually know why they care about this issue. They know, for example, they've thought about this in terms of productivity. They've thought about it in terms of clients, suppliers. Thought about it in terms of why this matters to them. I was working with an organization earlier this week, and we were talking about LGBTQ plus inclusion, and the my question to them is, why are you caring about this issue?
mm,
Not in the big, not in the it's the right thing to do. Tell me your own business case for why you care about LGBTQ plus inclusion for your business.
mm,
And they couldn't articulate it. And so for me, yes, we can do lots of
yeah.
positive things, but if it's not deeply ingrained, if it's not systematic, if it's not absolutely fully on board with the CEOs or the leadership or the exec board, it's always going to struggle.
Yes. But if you look at, and I totally agree with you. I remember looking years ago, again, I used to spend a lot of time evaluating. And always used to make me laugh. I used to go and evaluate HR departments, and he used to say, "Oh yes, we want to do evaluation of our HR department." I said, "What's your budget?" "Oh, we haven't got a budget. We haven't got a budget to determine if we're any good or not, and we'll have to go and ask the
Yeah,
finance department for that." And I used to say,
yeah,
"Well, that's the first answer." Anyway, the point at which I've got quite a contentious view, which is return on pay, which is a very simple productivity measure, is quite straightforward, and it's something that could easily be looked at. So if you look at things like engagement is sweating the human asset, isn't it? The concept of Gallup, when you actually read between the lines, is actually we'll get your people to do more for the same amount of money. And actually, this is the argument that DEI
yeah.
has lost. And I wonder whether our community needs to get back together to refresh this idea and say, either we need to have the same underpinning idea, but we present it and we monitor it and measure it differently, or actually we need to come up with something new because perhaps that idea now is so corrupted that actually it's becoming an issue for organizations to buy it almost.
I think it's really, I use this word a lot, interesting, but I think it's interesting to unpick that a little bit more because, the discretionary effort, if we talk about that through engagement, you know, people going above and beyond stuff because they love working in the organization. They're super engaged. They'll give you extra for the same money, I think is really interesting. And I think a little bit, in my own view, a bit of a historical lens on where we have been. COVID, I think, and the lockdowns twisted organizations in many, many different ways. Some of it for positivity, some of it for not. And I think, people felt more isolated and they were therefore questioning actually, the purpose of work. And I think organizations, when they talk about engagement and engagement scores and they do employee opinion surveys, are
Mm.
seeing but one small part of the picture.
Oh yeah.
They're not seeing the daily experience. I'm a big advocate of deep employee listening. What's people's daily experience of coming into this organization? Don't give me your engagement score that typically, and this is me being super controversial, this is typically a process to make the exec team feel better.
Well, yes, of course it is, because actually some of their pay plans are dependent on higher
Yeah,
engagement. Because Gallup have proved that higher engagement means, we can pay people less because they love coming to this place of work. It's interesting. I remember years ago working with the head of Macmillan, and he said something that was really fascinating at the time. We were doing some consultancy work for them, and he talked about the third sector as being over engaged. So what you have is a lack of productivity. So you have under engagement in the corporate sector, and you have over engagements with the cause. And often what you get in a leadership sense is people who are massively engaged with the cause, but they don't necessarily again follow that sort of corporate process about how to make the difference that they want to make. And this is particularly important in cancer care at the time, because what you had people
yeah,
doing is coming in and doing all sorts of things to make themselves feel better, but actually not growing the organization and the very thing that was earning their salaries. So I
yeah.
think over engagement is quite a fascinating problem as well.
Yeah. And I think, and I would agree with you in terms of the third sector, that's typically been the challenge of people are
Yeah,
very passionate about their cause, passionate about what they're trying to achieve. And actually, is it always the most targeted or useful thing for us to be thinking about?
yeah,
Um, and I think, that's where a lot of organizations should do that more reflection. Even any organization should be thinking about that. But ultimately, I think in the third sector, that over delivery, because people are so passionate, is something that is a positive, but equally, if it's directed in the best way, to
mm,
think about the impact.
mm,
What impact are we having? How's that helping us? Where's that taking us? Let's use the word, is it commercial? Is it helping us get
mm,
funding or grants, or is it helping us deliver our impact? I think is all really good stuff
yeah.
for organizations to be thinking about.
Yeah, it's fascinating as a group of LGBT charities. We very rarely come together and actually say, it was entirely feasible to have sat down and said a year ago, what would be the situation if this happened? Because what happened with the Supreme Court was it was possible, if not probable. And then, because of course, then we did nothing to head that off because we don't work together. And I just and then since then we've not, we've coalesced. There's been a degree of coalescence. There's been like a sort of a honeycomb of pact with lots of people in different bubbles, all saying the same thing, all then duplicating work and effort and such like. And again, there's this lack of not controlling mind, because I don't mean that, but that lack of sort of foresight of where we're all moving forward together. It was one of I think it was Bobby Pickard that said maybe I'm paraphrasing it, so do forgive me, but the problem with all of this is that we think we're a community and we're not, because
Yeah.
we don't have a hut, we don't have a badge, we don't have a uniform, that sort of thing. And I think that's absolutely right, because we're a demographic rather than a community. And once we stop thinking about ourselves as a community, it explains why we're actually not pulling together and working together, and alliances are tactical, and there's opportunities lost every single day.
I just reflecting on what you've said, I would agree that actually given the Supreme Court, and probably just prior to it, as a community, I've seen us come together more
Yeah.
than we've ever done. And I like your thought about the honeycomb of coming together. There's a sense that we should be working more together. I think there's a lot of legacy, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of concern around
Mm.
that. We know, especially in the third sector, and equally through organizations working in this sector who are not charities, the amount of money available, the amount of work available is less than it was.
Mm.
And so, therefore, that can drive individualistic behaviors. It can
Mm.
drive a lack of collaboration, a lack of working together. Yes, we as a community, I would agree. I don't think we've thought ourselves as a community because it's never really been something that's been that
Mm.
important for us. And, without being, again, a little bit controversial, we've had the leading organization in this sector, which was Stonewall, who, had huge amount of income. And I think a lot of people felt that they were almost the leaders in this space. And, rightly or wrongly, we've come to a very different thinking now, I think.
Yeah.
Stonewall is still an amazing charity, still doing great stuff. But actually, through the legacy and the history, I think as a community, almost that leadership part of it, we or the community gave to Stonewall. I also think I don't want to decry all the amazing work that everybody in the sector is doing, but actually having a cohesive, loud voice that where we've come together is problematic for us as a community. And I think we're
Mm.
still learning how to come together as a community. And I
Mm.
love what you said earlier, which was we need to think of ourselves as a community before we can think about actually how we come together.
Yes. That's really interesting, isn't it? That's really made something you just said there has really sort of triggered something for me because it is interesting how Stonewall were the leaders, and now it's hard to and there were other organizations that were large and have, for all sorts of different reasons have fallen, and often through poor leadership, oddly enough. And but what's happened now is we have much fewer sizable organizations which actually have a sort of a juggernaut effect in the market to push things forward. And we have a
Yeah.
lot more individualistic brand building that's going on, and people who are, and I know you've got a theory on this, which we'll come to in a minute, but it is interesting that we see many more individuals come into the fore rather than organizations.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's, and I wonder if that's, I wonder if that's I wonder if that's a feature of the modern age, and I'm very old, so I can talk about the modern age. It's been this
Me
century.
too. Me too.
Yeah,
Um,
but I wonder if that's useful that we have lost those sense of the sort of old traditional market structure where you have
yeah.
either two or three very very large organizations, you have hundreds and hundreds of little ones, but you have those gluey ones in the middle who are
Yeah.
really and on the way up or on the way down or whatever. We don't really seem to have developed that market structure in a way that's useful because we've all be just sort of fiddling around at the bottom, and the big ones have dropped down and everyone's now scrabbling around.
I, I would agree, and I think it's probably a couple of reasons, and it's worth us sort of having a chat about it. We'd love to also hear people's views of listening to this on their views too. I think, the external environment undoubtedly has changed. I'm of an age, I transitioned, 15 years ago? Life was different. We have seen the political environment
Yeah.
shift dramatically. We have seen the mainstream media here in the United Kingdom shift dramatically. We have seen I think it's Gallup or is it Ipsos, one of the polls about trans and non-binary acceptance in the UK as a result following that trend. And so therefore, when we've had historic organizations who have been, in my words, sort of leading or trying to lead in this space, a shift in those environments made it incredibly difficult for those organizations to continue to lead, whether it's through litigation, whether it's through lack of access to politicians or reduced access, a lack of access to mainstream media. Yes, the media landscape has dramatically changed. We know that because there's more content, such as this great content available for people to listen to. But ultimately, that equally has caused challenges. We also know that funding has reduced.
Mm,
The LGBTQIA plus sector is the least funded sector out of any of
mm,
the sectors. And even that, the funding has reduced. So we know life is tougher. Even those large organizations that historically were out loud and proud and very, very good at funding,
yeah.
I would argue that some of that has now reduced as well on all those levels. So I think, the environment is very different. I also think, and this is the super controversial thing that we talked about a little bit earlier, is as a sector, we love awards.
Mm,
We love awards. We have many options for awards. And yes, they are great for visibility. They are great to inspire other people. They are great to lift up our community and amplify it. I think with any approach, there's also some unintended consequences.
mm,
And I would say one of the unintended consequences for us as a community is that award chasing creates behaviors which I don't think often lead to greater collaboration and coming together of the sector. And in my corporate work, I'd often be talking about unintended consequences. One of the things from a corporate perspective I loved was organizational change.
mm,
Um, and there is no perfect organizational design in an organization because there is always something that's having unintended consequences. And I think, that's our challenge as a sector, that actually with a hostile external or increasingly hostile external environment
mm,
or more challenging external environment, together with a focus on visibility and awards, it does have unintended consequences. And it would be foolish for me to sit here and walk past that.
which ones spring to mind? Which unintended consequences spring to mind?
I think it's because we've seen, as you rightly said, we've seen more individual operators appear in this space. And that's great in terms of people trying to make a career and a business out of what they do. And I think that's awesome.
Mm,
But equally, I think that drives a behavior around look at me,
yes.
look at me, look at what I'm doing. And I'm not having a go at anybody in particular because I absolutely would not want that to happen. But I think our culture of awards is, there are positivities absolutely about it, but I think
Mm,
equally it is not helping us come together as a sector. I think what is more important, and to give it this conversation more of a balance, I think the fact of the lack of funding or lack of opportunities equally is driving
mm,
individuals to think about how they survive. And I think, that is the biggest factor. Um,
mm.
and the fact is we don't have one unified voice. And we are a disparate community. We've always been a very disparate community, but I think with the lack of some of those, I think you call them mushy organizations in the middle, or fewer of them, or the ones
And
that
I
are
think,
still
yeah,
there
and
more challenged. I think that's a challenge for us.
it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, I have sat in meetings, many meetings now, which have achieved almost nothing. And I've listened to people say, "Hey, we've got this great scheme. No, it's never been done before. And it's fantastic, and it's this, and it's that, and it's the other, and we're struggling with this, we're struggling with that." And then someone across the room will say, "Well, we're doing exactly the same thing." And there's never a conversation that says, "Oh, how can we pool our resources? How can we split issues? How can we share IT? How can we think imaginatively about the way we operate as organizations? Partly that's the funding, but and maybe the awards should be best working collaboration.
Yeah, maybe.
And maybe because that's the way to do it. So I know in our sector, what we've done is in the particular part of the world I work in, we have started to partner with organizations, and we've said things like, "You do this, and we'll stop doing this." And people are like, "You'll stop doing something." Yeah, I said, "Yeah,
Yeah,
because you're doing it, and you're doing it better than us. So why would we do it? But we do this. So well, why don't you stop doing your? Oh no, we can't stop doing that." It's like, the thing about partnership working is that it's about getting better at a small number of things, isn't
yeah,
it? We've all got accountants. When was the last time we all shared an accountant, went and got really good rates from it? When was the last time we all drove down our corporate insurance rates? Well, we don't. We just miss an opportunity, I think, to
and I
really
think
come
that's
together.
and I think that's a challenge of small organizations and
Yes.
small businesses, full stop.
Yeah. And we have a
We
funder who's very good at actually facilitating those things, and I think that's
Yes,
been revolutionary, I think.
we're really clear on what we offer, and we're really clear on what we not offer. And
Yeah.
if an organization wants something that we don't offer, we'll hand it off to somebody who will do it better than we will do.
Yeah.
And so, it's about knowing where you can leverage those partnerships and where you
Yeah.
don't. And I think, it's really interesting when you think of this sector in terms of there's lots and lots and lots of small organizations surviving on very little funding. And they're doing amazing work and really worthwhile work. But the fact we're not sharing, the fact we're not working together, the fact that there's some things that we should be leveraging, I think is a huge opportunity for the sector. But I think it's still an evolution that we're going through. The question will be for those organizations, how long have you got?
Yeah.
And I
Int-
think,
yeah.
that's some of the challenges.
And we should be thinking of how we nurture talent in our own sector and actually supporting and putting funding, pushing that round the piece. And I know people try and do it, but we do get lost in the ego side of things. Broadly, I mean, this is part of, as we're starting to get close to the end of our time together, but broadly, are you positive, optimistic, fearful about the future?
I think all those things. So my wife often says to me, I am the most optimistic person on the planet. Because if you don't have hope, if you
Yeah,
don't have optimism, the alternative for me is not something that sits well with me.
no.
I think there's a couple of things that is worth thinking about. Yes, I am fearful of the future. I'm fearful of, where this government is going to go. I'm fearful of what the Minister of Equalities will decide with the
Mm,
um, ECHR code of practice. We're sitting here in the 9th of October and we still don't know. I'm fearful of a lot, but I think for me is what can I best influence? What can I best support? What can I do? And yes, it's a overused analogy, but how can I feel I've got more control about
yeah,
things that I can't about myself and what we do rather than what I can't control? I can try and influence the Minister for Equalities by writing a letter, but I can't control her. Um,
right.
so my view is, okay, how do we keep ourselves safe? How do we keep our business safe? How do we do things that still give us joy and
Mm,
hope and inspiration that maybe are nothing to do with this particular sector? We've all got amazing hobbies, families, things that we love doing. Spending time in joy when sometimes things look a bit dark, I think is my best advice to people right now. But equally, the small things. So, yes, myself and my wife, we watched the Supreme Court judgment live, which probably wasn't the best thing to do, and we cried. We're both from a corporate background. My wife, has a legal background. We've read the judgment. I think I've now read it 5 times. But off the back of the judgment, we went straight onto Amazon and bought an accessible toilet key.
yeah,
It felt as if we were doing, it
something. Yeah,
felt as if we were grabbing that control and saying, actually, irrespective of what's happening, there's still a place where I can feel safe to use
Yeah.
the loo. And it's a crazy small thing, and we shouldn't be having to do it. But ultimately, it's within our gift to do it. And so I would always say to people, what's in your gift
Mm.
to regain control? Because it can feel as if you're powerless.
Mm.
I think, it's uplifting others is my big thing. I love uplifting other people because for me, that feels as if I'm helping others on that journey to be themselves. And so, our charitable arm that we created 2 years ago, we are super proud of in
Mm.
terms of raising funds for trans and non-binary charities around the UK and also internationally. Super proud about that. And that's our activism with a small a.
Yes.
We are hugely admirers of people who will go and do the hard yards, who
Yes.
will go and talk to the politicians, who will write the letters, who will campaign. We are hugely admirers of those, and we will actually fund those people.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we all need to find our way in life and think about, what am I good at?
Mm.
I'm good at persuading people, possibly with large money, to give some to a charity. Okay, that's what I'm good at. Finding your skills, finding what you're good at, and also make sure you have joy. Would love to hear your thoughts as well, as we've talked about, the future. And I think a lot of people often dwell in the darkness.
Mm.
So, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think it's a sad fact that we agree on so much in a way because we could have had a big old row today about different things, but we do agree on so much. And I think possibly it's a generational thing. But I one of the if I had a magic wand today, I wish our demographic would stop putting itself in this place of being vulnerable and a victimhood. The thing is, we're a remarkable community. We're very imaginative. We're very robust. We're hugely resilient because actually, if
Hmm.
you think of the rubbish that's thrown at this, group of people, a small group of undeserving people find themselves in in the eye of a storm, which is none of their making. It comes from being funded
Yeah.
25, 30 years ago from different places. So we're caught in this web. But I think it's time to start saying, we can fight back. We've got the power of coming together. We're a large enough community for, but what's interesting is on Disney, someone was taken off the air. Was it Jimmy Kimmel? Loads of people took away the
Yeah.
subscriptions and put it back
Yeah.
again. Collectively, our community spends a heck of a lot of money on different things.
Yeah.
We don't think about that. We don't think about where do we put our money, where do we put support, how we vocally get together and do that. And I think we have to move out of this sort of this, oh my God, it's all broken, into, okay, how do we fix things and make it happen? Just as you say, and it is just about control.
It is about control. And I think it's very easy to get into a dark place
Yeah.
and very easy to feel as if you are the victim. And
And
yes,
easy to get out as well. And I think people
it is.
forget that bit.
It is easy to get out. Being trans for me is my superpower. It
Yeah.
brings me so much joy, so much confidence and being grounded. And I think, it's about leaning into that and going, actually, what can I do? And sometimes it's the small things and sometimes it's the big things. Yes, I've got an MP who's a very different political colour to me. She
Mm.
disagrees with me. I will continue to write to her, continue to influence her, continue to ask her to go and to meet me. And she'll continually say no because
Mm.
that's not who she is. But ultimately, I
Until
think,
she doesn't.
yeah, you know,
Yeah.
and I will keep going.
Yeah.
My wife will say, "Why are you writing to her again?" She's not going to say anything differently.
She
She's
might.
my only representative. I'm going to keep on doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And what I'm loving seeing is, as we've seen other challenges within the United Kingdom, we have seen other communities starting to come alongside us.
Yeah.
So, I'm a big fan of, Not In My Name, the Neon
Yes.
Network, who, are saying we're cisgendered women who are saying we stand by the trans and non-binary community. I think that's absolutely awesome in
Agreed.
terms of bringing others into the conversation and not just being on us. I often say to my wife, there's other people also advocating. There's other people who can also voice. You don't have to
Yeah.
be on all the time. But ultimately, how do we bring other people in? How do we
Yeah.
start to, bring this broader conversation? We do lots of work in corporates, working with inclusive feminist groups,
Mm,
gender networks,
mm,
and we talk about the intersectionality. And I think for me, that's really interesting when you're bringing that conversation in and giving people a different lens to a conversation, maybe that they've thought about, maybe they're super supportive, or maybe they've got a different view. But I think, a lot of this is about how we use our skills, how we
yeah.
use ourselves, how we hold ourselves in this space.
Yeah. Agree. So people would like to find out more about the work you do, Emma, where should they look?
Yeah. So we're on our website is www.globalbutterflies.com. We are only on LinkedIn now. We were on other platforms, but the abuse and the
Yeah.
negativity for our own mental health just got a bit too much.
Yeah.
So we have retreated onto LinkedIn, and that's the majority of where we do our work.
Yeah.
We're also, our charitable arm is hosted by Give Out. So, do check out Give Out because they're an amazing group of people doing amazing work, raising funds for the LGBTQ plus community. But, you can find us on LinkedIn, you can find me, and you can find my wife. There's only two of us in the business. My wife is Rachel Reese, who is so awesome and so inspirational. You can find her on LinkedIn as well.
Could you hear the noise of that penny dropping on this side of the camera? Sorry, I hadn't put two and two together there. So
Yeah.
pennies have just dropped up my side of the camera. Well, look, it's been a joy to talk to you today, Emma.
You
It's
too,
been
Gillian.
absolutely remarkable. And thank you for spending time with us, globalbutterflies.com. And so hopefully let's get that future that we want and,
Yeah.
harness the control. I think that's a key message from you this episode, isn't it?
Yeah. And let's collaborate more.
Absolutely. You take care.
You too. Thanks, Gillian.